moyo ganderia Maria Dewi Usaore moyo ganderia Maria Dewi Maria Dewi ganderia Maria Dewi Kuvirwa ne murume andwa Zino na moyo wegushinga Usaore moyo ganderia Maria Dewi Usaore moyo ganderia Maria Dewi Maria Dewi ganderia Maria Dewi
And welcome to Africa World Hour. This is Channel Africa, the African Perspective, broadcasting live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Catch us live on SABC Plus app, DSTV's OWBK channel 802, and on OpenView channel 628. I am Thabisolo Hoko, and I'm standing in for Tsepiso Makwetla, Africa World Hour. Stories that made headlines today. Let me go straight into them. And Cameroon opposition leader Maurice Kamto has urged calm after being barred from running in the October presidential election. The Electoral Commission's decision has raised fears of unrest that is seen as favoring 92-year-old President Paul Biya, who has ruled for decades. Kamto is reportedly under house arrest and plans to appeal the ruling. Nasto Jomachuni, the MRC CRM representative in South Africa, says the government has deployed heavy military presence in the country's two largest cities. Cameroon opposition leader Maurice Kamto has urged calm after being barred from running in the October presidential elections. The Electoral Commission's decision has raised fears of unrest and is seen as favoring the 92-year-old. Nestor Njomachumi, the MRC CRM representative in South Africa.
Exactly, it is very uncomfortable, but the president has sent a message out to the population to remain calm. We all know that the decision by the Electoral Commission can be appealed to the Constitutional Council. And all the candidate has 2 days to appeal the decision. So yesterday, the party appealed the decision on the Constitutional Council, and the Constitutional Council has 10 days to reply to our appeal. So the president has sent a clear message to all his militant and sympathizers to remain calm and wait until the decision from the Constitutional Council.
A UN-backed monitor, the Integrated Food Security Phase classification, says a famine that is described as the worst-case scenario is now unfolding in Gaza. The UN's World Food Programme says that the situation is reminiscent of famine seen in Ethiopia, Biafra in Nigeria, and the last century. The BBC's Yolandi Nell has the details.
The new alert predicts widespread death in Gaza without immediate action to stop malnutrition and starvation. It comes from the IPC, which is made up of more than 20 UN agencies and aid groups. While this warning falls short of a formal famine declaration, which the IPC says is for governments or international agencies to make, it adds pressure on Israel. Already in recent days, Israeli leaders have announced new measures, including daily pauses in fighting in parts of Gaza. but the UN and Palestinians say that on the ground little has changed. Desperate crowds continue to loot incoming aid lorries.
Thailand's army has accused Cambodia of violating a ceasefire agreed to yesterday after 5 days of border clashes. It says that there have been several clashes after Cambodian troops fired at Thai positions. The situation is now reported to be calm. This, as the BBC's Jonathan Head reports.
The ceasefire got off to a shaky start. Right up to the midnight deadline, there were intense exchanges of fire between the two armies, with Thailand launching more airstrikes on Cambodian positions. The Thai military says it stopped firing after midnight, but that it continued to receive gunfire from the Cambodian side up until this morning. As a result, meetings between local commanders, which were part of the ceasefire deal, were postponed twice. These have now taken place, with agreements to stop the shooting and movements of troops on the front line, and for each side to be able to collect their dead.
India's Home Minister Amit Shah has told Parliament that 3 armed men killed by soldiers in Indian-administered Kashmir on Monday were terrorists who had been involved in April's deadly attack on tourists near the town of Pahalgam. From Mumbai, here's the BBC's Yogita Limaye.
India's Home Affairs Minister Amit Shah said the identity of the attackers had been confirmed through forensic and ballistic tests. In June, Indian investigators had said that all 3 attackers were from Pakistan. Islamabad has repeatedly denied this claim, asking to see the evidence. India had responded to the Pahalgam attack by launching air and missile strikes against Pakistan, claiming to have destroyed militant bases in the country. Pakistan retaliated by firing missiles and drones at India in a military standoff that lasted for 4 days in May.
Pope Leo has warned of the ethical challenges posed by artificial intelligence during the Vatican's first Mass for Catholic social media influencers. Addressing 2,000 young content creators, he urged them to promote genuine human connection and avoid manipulation, including false advertising, blackmail and coercion. He called on them to protect human dignity in the age of AI.
Today we are in a culture where the technological dimension is present in almost everything, especially as the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence will mark a new era in the lives of individuals and societies as a whole. We have a duty to work together, to develop a way of thinking, to develop a language of our time that gives voice to love.
1 hour, 1 continent, 1 voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
SABC Sport brings you Chasing the Sun, a powerful 5-part documentary series about the Springboks, telling the rousing tale of their path to redemption and ultimate World Cup glory in 2019. Starting on the 13th of July at 7:30 p.m. on SABC2, tune in every Sunday for the highs, the heartache, and the heroics that made rugby history. Stream each chapter on SABC Plus anytime, anywhere. No subscription needed. Don't miss Chasing the Sun this Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC2. Be there when history shines.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
In an effort to advance women's rights in Africa, the Pan-African Parliament has been called upon to lead a coordinated and urgent campaign for the ratification of the African Union Convention on the Elimination of Violence by the African Union in 2024 and marks the first comprehensive and legally binding continental framework solely dedicated to eradicating violence against women and girls. Ntanta Mahlangu reports.
The call to action was amplified during a session in Midrand, located in Johannesburg, South Africa, with passionate pleas from Vice Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Janet Salanje. She emphasized the urgent need for a binding legal instrument to confront gender-based violence across the continent.
I appeal to honorable parliamentarians across our continent to exercise your critical leadership in making this instrument a tangible reality for African women and girls. The time for decision and action is now, and your role as legislative champions is indispensable in this historical endeavor. I therefore specifically urge you to be the voice of change in your parliaments. Proactively educate your parliamentary colleagues on the Convention's transformative potential.
The African Commission on Human and People's Rights, alongside the AU Special Envoy and the PEP Women Caucus, has made it clear that the time for symbolic gestures is over. Lindiwe Mugabe, Program Specialist on Ending Violence Against Women and Girls at the African Union Commission, says what is needed now is legislative courage, political will, and a united continental momentum. She urged African nations to accelerate the ratification of the convention.
It's been 30 years since Beijing, and we are still crying, and we're crying a louder cry because of the regression in gender norms and all the hard-won gains that we had. We seem to be rolling back. But I also want to appreciate the honorable members for their support of the convention and to reiterate that the Gender Directorate stands ready to support them in their signing process, in the ratification, and also in the implementation of the campaign towards ratification.
Sierra Leone Member of Parliament Rosemary Bankura says the AU Convention is not only timely but urgent.
It provides a continental platform to standardize protection, enhance collaboration, and uphold each other accountable. Mr. President, I call on all members here today present to work with our national government to ratify, domesticate, and implement the convention. Let us align our national action plans with these provisions and ensure our parliaments have the tools and resources needed to perform effective oversights. Because Africa cannot rise while its women and girls are living in fear. This convention signals our resolve to create a continent where no woman or girl is unsafe, unheard, or unseen. Let us rise to this challenge together. I know African women will be liberated.
6 AU member states, Djibouti, Angola, the Gambia, DRC, Burundi, and Liberia, have signed the convention, but none have ratified it. 15 ratifications are needed for it to enter into force. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Nhlanhla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
South Africa will continue to engage with the United States of America. This amidst global anxiety about Trump's sweeping tariffs that will take effect on the 1st of August. A former president, Kgalema Motlanthe, his foundation hosted a seminar looking at how Pretoria should navigate the new order. Presidential Special Envoy in North America, ABC Jonas, government officials and business community attended the session at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Bonolo Maribe has more.
The world is on tenterhooks as the United States of America prepares to roll out sweeping tariffs that may affect a number of countries come August 1st. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe says the country must continue to negotiate and explore other markets as well.
Negotiating and discussing with their counterparts in the United States of America. And of course, from the rest of the seminar, you heard that we shouldn't be single track-minded. We should be also opening up other tracks to try and gain more access to other markets.
Accordingly, Pretoria is still trying to thaw the frosty ties with Washington, D.C. U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff decision has rattled the markets and has sent a wave of uncertainty through the global economy. International Relations and Cooperation Director General Zane Dango is still hopeful to convince the U.S. on the tariffs issue.
Part of our foreign policy is also being very clear that we cannot have an expedient foreign policy. I think if you look at the history of expediency in international relations, it's always been at the expense of those marginalized and oppressed. And our history, our values, enjoin us not to do that.
The presidential special envoy in North America, Ngabisi Jonas, says these are unprecedented times, but the world should not despair.
My role really is a presidential special envoy. My role is really to advise on policy, and I do engagements for sure, but I think my main focus is building South Africa's response to this reality, to the new reality, and engaging with all the agencies of the state, but also engaging with all stakeholders in the private sector, in civil society and everywhere, so that South Africans speak with one voice on these issues, and also educating ourselves about what should our responses be.
This while the US claims to have clinched a huge deal with the European Union. That includes a 15% tariff on most EU goods, $600 billion of investments in the US by European firms, and $750 billion in energy purchases over the next 3 years. I am Bonolo Maribe, SABC News.
Mayor of South African city of Johannesburg, Dada Morero, says that the city is ready to host the upcoming G20 summit scheduled to take place in November this year. South Africa, which has the G20 presidency, will host world leaders under the theme Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability. While President Cyril Ramaphosa has assured the African continent that South Africa will prioritize Africa's development at the top as the top agenda of the summit, questions have been raised if the city of Johannesburg has the capacity to host the event. Sibahle Mota reports.
Jabulani in Soweto was a hive of activity on Tuesday morning as Joburg Mayor Dada Morero embarked on a high-impact service delivery program in the area. This as preparations within the city of Johannesburg are underway ahead of the highly anticipated G20 summit. Morero says that the high-impact service delivery program is conducted in various wards with the intention to accelerate service delivery.
So we're here in this area to look at potholes, street lights, the completion of the bridge, the water reservoir project, which will be completed in July next year. So it has started. It needs to be refurbished. And at the same time, they're also doing the Jabulani and the Power Park reservoirs, so the Soweto area do not experience water challenges into the future. So as part of the budget that we deployed in May, we are now beginning to spend and respond to this project.
The 2016 local government elections saw the ANC lose its majority, leading to a coalition government in the city of Joburg. Since then, the city has battled infrastructural challenges such as unreliable water and electricity supply, which has left Joburg residents frustrated. The city of Joburg's challenges have further given rise to questions if the metro has the capacity to host the G20 summit. But the Joburg mayor says the city of gold is more than ready to host any top international events.
We are confident. We have already hosted almost 4 meetings. The foreign ministers was in Nazareth. There were a bit of challenges that we have corrected. Those ministers of health in Melrose. There were ministers of finance, and I think the last one was the ministers of local government who were somewhere in Sandton. So we've already hosted about 4 G20 meetings, and of course the summit is the last one, which will be hosted in November.
Residents of Jabulani who have asked not to be named have criticized the city of Joburg's efforts to fix service delivery issues. One resident says this is only a temporary measure because of the upcoming local government elections, while another says young people only want jobs.
First of all, we are satisfied with service delivery. Because
we are not happy with service delivery. They only do things right because elections are approaching. There aren't any job opportunities, and a lot of the young people are sitting at home without any means of getting help.
It's unemployment. We have a lot of unemployment, like I see, and we have abantu abadala like us, they complain about youth. They do this, they do that, they do the other, but then they don't understand. That's the biggest problem we're facing, like Jabulani. Well, every other township is facing unemployment and no one is doing anything about it. Because Namama Postangena, people have their own people ababafagayo. There is a lot of nepotism going on in the country.
While the Joburg mayor has assured South Africans that the G20 summit will be a success, he has urged the Johannesburg Metro Police to increase its capacity for crime prevention and law enforcement. I am Sibahle Mota in Soweto.
If you've just tuned in, welcome to it. This is Africa World Hour on Channel Africa. My name is Tabiso Lohoko. South Africa's Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Dean McPherson, says that the report by PwC in the controversial 800 million rand, a pressure swing absorption oxygen plant tender awarded by the Independent Development Trust IDT represents a monumental failure in governance and adherence to the IDT's policies and National Treasury regulations. McPherson says that the awarding of the tender undermined the integrity of public procurement and threatened donor funds. Nothando Makutulela reports.
The Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Dean McPherson, says that he's glad that his department acted when it did, despite criticism received during the investigating process. McPherson revealed that according to some of the findings in the report, the bid evaluation process was flawed and that the IDT CEO, Tebogo Malaka, failed to exercise oversight during this process. The report by the PwC also found many irregularities, including maladministration, financial misconduct, and corruption, as well as misrepresentation by the bidders. McPherson says his government's commitment is to root out corruption and restore integrity in public procurement processes.
The report therefore confirms that multiple companies awarded work under the PSA project did not have valid SAPRA licensing and therefore should never have qualified in the first place. One company, as we have said originally, Bulking Pty Limited, submitted a SAPRA license belonging to Atlas Copco Industrial SA without the knowledge or consent of Atlas Copco. This was clear misrepresentation. In simple language, it's called fraud.
McPherson says the forensic investigation found that 8 bidders were appointed on the panel for the rollout of the PSA oxygen plant at 60 state hospital facilities. However, the service providers that were appointed on the panel were not required to provide evidence that they met the separate requirements as set out in the Infrastructure Program Implementation Plan.
The bid evaluation process was deeply flawed. The SAPRA compliance requirement, originally stipulated in the project execution plan and the Department of Health's Memorandum of Agreement, was deliberately removed from the final request for proposals. This opened the door for ineligible bidders to participate and win massive contracts which they did not qualify for. Meeting minutes were missing or incomplete, which is shocking but not surprising. And committee appointments for these bid adjudication committees were not properly constituted. The people sat on those committees that were not entitled to sit on them. And also bid scores were not properly documented.
It was also found that the tender amount ballooned from 216 million rand to nearly 600 million rand.
The PSP pre-tender estimated at tender stage was 216 million rand and at design stage was 253 million rand as determined by the service provider. The Department of Health was subsequently requested to approve the increased funding for the rollout and implementation of the plant projects to 592 million rand, more than double what the original starting estimate was. This project was therefore increased by a staggering 174%.
The PwC report recommends that appropriate action must be taken against the relevant officials who were involved in the oxygen plant project and that disciplinary action should be taken against IDT CEO Tebogo Malaka and Dr. Sisi of the IDT team. Nothando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
In this episode of Channel Africa Conversations, Peter talks to Dr. Thulisile Buddha, an academic, author, and an expert in indigenous knowledge systems. Join us for a compelling discussion on preserving African languages and traditions in the digital era. Dr. Thulisile unpacks the role of educators, explorers, and how technologies like AI can support cultural preservation, and challenges us to rethink how we honor African heritage. You can find the episode on YouTube, SABC Plus, and on our website, channelafrica.co.za. This episode is a must-listen for educators, creators, and change makers across the continent. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
There are many ways that in which you can connect with us, Channel Africa. We are coming live to you from Johannesburg. We are based in Auckland Park in South Africa. We're coming live to you from our studios. And another way to connect with us is if you follow us on social media for updates and highlights and exclusive content. X at Channel Africa 1, Facebook at Channel Africa, and Instagram at Channel Africa 1, and you can find us on TikTok at Channel Africa 1. On YouTube, we are also on Channel Africa 1.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
The current global health system, which has achieved tremendous gains over the past decades, is a bit like a bowl of spaghetti. Now listen to this. According to Mandeep Dhaliwal, the Director of Health at the UN Development Programme, UNDP, the intertwined noodles of pasta have in some ways produced a siloed health system. If you run with the metaphor, separate strands never quite connect. The public health is not a silo, Dhaliwal told UN News Naiwa Sawaya ahead of the high-level political forum being held in New York over the past 2 weeks, which will discuss the world's commitment to accessible healthcare and well-being for all.
Innovative financing is essentially untraditional sources of financing for healthcare. Whether that's public or private, it's bringing in new resources for healthcare. But it's not just about unlocking new streams of resources, it's also about using the resources effectively to get better health outcomes. One of the things that's been really inspiring was in 1999, Zimbabwe, which is a high-burden country for HIV, introduced an AIDS levy. And essentially, this was a 3% tax on individual and company incomes. And that tax is then used to fund HIV programming. So that's an example of innovative financing. I think one of the things that's really, really important in any discussions around financing for health is that we need to shift away from this mindset that health is a cost. Actually, health is an investment.
And I read that it's actually cheaper to invest in preventative healthcare than it is to treat it as an effect.
Absolutely, but it's very challenging because you don't see the prevention outcome. That's the age-old challenge. It's important to invest in prevention as much as it is in treatment, and it is more cost-effective because you prevent rather than treating. You're turning off the tap, as it were.
Through everything you've described, it seems that the goal of innovative financing for healthcare is to build systems which are both funded and resilient to shocks. Why is this important?
If you are just funding health systems and you're not looking at the resilience and the sustainability, you're just going to keep pouring more and more money in, especially in today's world where we're dealing with compounding crises related to climate, conflict, economic crises. So a health system needs to be resilient, and it needs to be resilient not just by investments in health, but also investments in energy supply, in using data to be more effective, and digital tools to access and make your investments more targeted. It needs to be climate resilient. A health system's not going to survive no matter how much money you put into the health sector if there's extreme flooding, if the water's not clean, if the supply chains break. While it's really important to invest in the health sector and the health system, you also need to look at it as an interconnected part of a range of systems.
Sometimes stepping back and seeing this in this big picture frame can be very difficult. So how would you explain it to someone on the ground?
One of the things to say to people is that health is not a silo. The data and evidence from years ago shows that the factors that influence health are often outside the health sector. So imagine if you are living in a very polluted city. You have more respiratory illness, you have more cardiac disease. So if you reduce air pollution, you can improve health outcomes. So that's just one example of how investing in the factors that influence health, making sure those systems are working in synergy with the health system is really, really critical.
And so you mentioned the example of, I think it was Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Are there other examples of health systems which have become more resilient as a result of the innovative financing techniques?
So I think we're going to start to see more and more precipitated by a crisis in financing, which is essentially a political crisis, because we know that there is enough money. It's just not allocated to the right places. It's not invested in the right places. One of the examples that I love to share is that, the cost of one aircraft carrier could fund 3/4 of the Global Fund's $18 billion investment ask. So it's really about a misalignment of priorities and a misalignment of financing and not seeing health, I think, as the really powerful investment that it is for security, for development, and for peace. We've committed to health and well-being for all at all ages, and that requires investment and delivering on that commitment through money, but also through partnership and collaboration.
It sounds like this lack of investment in healthcare is very persistent. So what keeps you going and what gives you hope?
I've spent a lot of time working on HIV in developing countries, and I've seen incredible things happen. It was a disease of despair and death affecting the most vulnerable communities in the 90s. There was scientific breakthrough. There was the development of a life-saving treatment. It was very costly. The world mobilized to bring treatment to low and middle-income countries. And with investment, we have seen development in highly impacted and high-burden countries really make a difference. With consistent investment, it's been turned around.
That was Mandeep Dhaliwal, the Director of Health at the UN Development Programme, speaking to the UN News' Naima Sawaya. On to this now. Governments have reaffirmed their commitment to place gender equality at the centre of global development, adopting a key declaration at this year's high-level political forum. With just 5 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, this renewed pledge comes as the world approaches the Beijing Plus 30 anniversary. For more on this, we now speak to Shoko Ishikawa, Deputy Director of Policy Programme and Intergovernmental Division at UN Women. Shoko, good evening, and it's very good to see you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. Shoko, let's start with the big picture. What's the core message behind this new ministerial declaration on gender equality?
Right. The core message, and it's significant that this was a declaration as part of the high-level political forum, which is the United Nations, annual check-in on how we are doing on these global goals, the SDGs. And it's important that gender equality was highlighted, that it's not a side issue, but it's a solution. It's really something that cuts across all of the Sustainable Development Goals and is central to solving and advancing all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So for us, the fact that there was a very strong reaffirmation of the governments that convened at the high-level political forum that discussed, among other things, poverty, climate. They also discussed gender equality, and they have had this strong commitment. It's against the current global tide that is not necessarily always positive around gender equality. We have seen regressions in laws. We have seen countries that have been trying to restrict more rights of women and girls. But this really sends a message that the world leaders are paying attention to gender equality as a key foundation for our success for the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development.
Definitely. I mean, this sends a very strong message. The reaffirmation, the commitment is important. And as you stated, especially in the times that we are living in, whereby we've seen how globally some countries have exercised that, one, if I may call it, disparity in a way. How does this moment compare to previous milestones like Beijing 1995 or the launch of the SDGs?
Right. It's very much a continuum. The SDGs is reaffirming the Beijing platform for action. It very much borrows from the Beijing platform for agenda, which is the most visionary and comprehensive global blueprint when it comes to gender equality and women's rights. There is much to be done to further implement the Beijing Platform for Action. And so it's really significant that the high-level political forum has looked at SDG 5 on gender equality at this 30-year milestone year, where we also in March we had the Commission on the Status of Women, where we also had a very strong political declaration around the further implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. And so it really is a very good continuum that we have two consecutive declarations unanimously adopted by the member states that reaffirm gender equality as the core principles carrying forward the Beijing Platform for Action.
This is indeed encouraging, and we've, over the years, heard the phrase gender equality and development. What does that look like in practical terms?
Right, there's still a lot to be done. The data is very clear, and we unfortunately also had some setbacks with COVID. Inequality is still very prominent. In member states, whether it's north or the south, there are a lot of gaps that we still need to be filling. Take, for example, women's leadership and participation. It's going to take 123 years to reach full gender parity. So that's 50-50 representation of women and men. And when we look at issues such as unpaid care work, which holds women back from being able to participate in productive work, and issues such as the pay gap, although women may be working, there is pay discrimination. So we continue to see 20% less pay and earnings of women compared to men. And when it comes to this unpaid care work, 2.5 more times of time is being spent by women in domestic work and care work. The figures go on, and we have also new issues that we have to contemplate. And we've already had continuing high rates of violence against women, but there are new forms of violence that are shaped by the advancement of technology. Of course, there's benefits of new technology, that it is giving some women better access to finance, better access to information, but at the same time is creating new forms of violence in online spaces and by the use of technology that we are finding it more and more. And it has been discussed in these international forums also in terms of ways to address these digital forms of violence. So there's still quite a lot to do in the development world in terms of trying to close the gap and reach that ambition of the SDG 5. If I may, I think we also are facing lots of funding challenges in this work. Thank you.
I'm sure. I mean, those funding challenges could have to do with perhaps not many donors coming forward, but with systems that you have been advocating for, especially a priority that has been mentioned. I heard you talk about care, and I understand that there's a system called care, your care system. I'm far more interested in that because I myself want to be cared for as well. So perhaps if you could maybe unbundle that. What does it mean in your terms, your care systems?
Right. Yes. So when we talk about care systems, it's not just looking at one dimension of childcare or just looking at reducing and balancing the care burden between men and women. There are also responsibilities that the governments have to also take on. So it's looking at it comprehensively as a system of governments, private sector, individuals, household, community. It is really a whole sort of ecosystem of care that we need to establish. And that has to be established through forward-looking policy of the government. So that's what we talk about when we talk about care systems. And it needs to look at reducing the care work, as I mentioned, through governments kicking in with their public care systems. There are private sector initiatives that could also take place. And then we also need to be looking at the care work that is being undertaken by women, even the paid care work that is predominantly taken care by women are often underpaid. And so we need to make sure that the care works that are paid are also decent work. And there is equitable remuneration for the very hard work that women undertake as carers. So it is a whole policy system and infrastructure services that need to be taken care of, looking at it from a public policy perspective. So this is an area that has been given increasing attention, and within the UN system, UN Women has taken the lead in also bringing together the different UN agencies that touch upon this issue, whether it's ILO or UNICEF from the perspective of childcare, WHO looking at it from healthcare. So really trying to look at care comprehensively also from the UN system, looking at and having the same strategic direction.
With that said, you've actually answered my next question that was going to look into unpaid work, discriminatory laws, social norms, and one was actually interested to establish what will it take to shift those, especially in this increasingly interconnected global village.
Yes, that's a very, very good question. Sorry. I mean, it does come down to political will in many ways, and it does mean that we need to make sure that there is participation of women in decision making on these issues. As I mentioned, women's political participation is still lagging behind. And so when it comes to these discussions on national policies and laws, planning and budget decision making, we need much more women's leadership and participation in those spaces to be able to provide the perspectives of women, what is needed at the various levels. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that women are in those decision-making positions. Second, we need to make sure that we have very strong data and analysis on these issues. UN Women supports surveys such as time use surveys, which is an SDG indicator, so that we can advise on appropriate policies. So data on how time is being used, but also data around resource allocation is important. We could be talking about building care systems, but if we cannot make sure that there is financing behind it, nothing will be moving forward. So we look at trying to cost. What would a good care system be? What would be the financing that is necessary behind it? so that the advocacy for the policy changes also come with a price tag, in a sense, and governments can appropriately build a plan towards financing the systems that need to be in place. So it really is about decision making, using data for evidence-based planning, and really putting funding against it. Also need to make sure that there is a very clear accountability system, that it is transparent, and women's groups, users are able to feedback on the usefulness of the services or any gaps that they see. So we do need a very comprehensive response.
One agrees one of the reasons why we develop these policies is so that they can be implemented effectively, and requiring the necessary funding in order for that to happen. And it would take us talking more about these issues in order to amplify them and, reach to those particular donors and understand the importance of such issues. Let's talk again about rural and indigenous women, who are often left out of the mainstream policy conversations. How is the UN Women making sure they're heard and supported?
Yes, a very good question. We do follow the SDGs ambition of leaving no one behind. And even when we look at issues like care, we do need to have different kinds of solutions for urban population and the rural population. So we are very much into learning about community-based care systems that can be accessed by women in the rural areas. And these are built very much through our consultations with the rural women, our partnerships with other UN agencies that have expansive programs in the rural areas. But in general, UN Women does have very strong connections with civil society groups that have a far further reach into rural areas and connections with indigenous groups. We have particular programs that we have in Latin America countries, building indigenous women's entrepreneurship and their ability to participate in the economy. We also contribute to more political processes, making sure that rural women, indigenous women also participate in local elections and have a particular say in the local decision making. But it also goes up all the way to international decision making forums, where we will make sure that the rural women, indigenous women's voices are channeled into the international normative frameworks. For example, we supported the CEDAW committee, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, which most of the member states have ratified. They were developing a special recommendation around the rights of indigenous women. We collaborated with the CEDAW committee to make sure that the CEDAW committee had a chance to have consultations with rural women in building this general recommendation. And so we convened these regional consultations with our partner organizations in the different regions around the world. And we have made sure that this general recommendation comes out with the strong responses and solutions to the unique violations of rights that indigenous women face.
What's the role of men and boys in making gender equality a reality? And is enough?
Very much, yeah. No, great question. We need very strong alliance with men and boys. We do, and this is a question around social norms that I think you touched upon. We do need the partnership with men and boys in shifting the social norms. We have initiatives such as He for She, where we are partnering with male champions that can speak on gender equality and the benefits of gender equality for men also. Gender inequality also is, it manifests in men also being stereotyped into roles that they do not necessarily believe in themselves, but there is social pressure to conform. So we are mobilizing men and male champions in our work on trying to shift not only issues like care, but even political representation of women. Women are often held back because of the social norms and restrictions in the family from their male members. So political participation, their economic participation, of course, preventing violence against women, all of these issues, we need a partnership with men and boys, and the men and boys voice, that gender advocates amongst the men and boys really speaking in their community to shift the behaviors and the understanding.
Shoko, I'm very happy that we touched base this evening to talk about these commitments as well as the reaffirmation, the decisions that have been made thus far. And with 2030 being around the corner, from what you have told us, I'm sure we could also be ready to meet the targets of the SDGs. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and we'll keep on keeping in touch with you in order to see how we can help you steer this in the right direction.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
That was Shoko Ishikawa, Deputy Director of Policy Program and Intergovernmental Division at UN Women.
Nighttime radio, just the way you like it, on Channel Africa, where the night comes alive. Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
With over 5.5 billion people online, nearly all of them active on social media, digital platforms have become the main arena for public debate. But a steady rise in misogynistic content online is fueling a toxic environment that only silences women and girls, but also reinforces harmful gender norms. The UN Agency for Gender Equality, UN Women, has warned. Experts say that addressing this trend requires more than just protecting girls. It also means building a world where boys are free from pressures of toxic masculinity and restrictive gender expectations. In UN Women's Calliope Mengiro, who leads the efforts to end violence against women and girls, outlined to UN News' Anna Kamo the alarming spread of online misogyny and what can be done to stop it.
What we see as an increasing trend right now, it's like we have young men, boys, having to deal with a lot of struggles in their lives around finding a job, dating, and having security in their lives from a financial perspective, but also how they can feel good about themselves. So what we see as an increasing trend is these younger men and boys, they tend to look for influencers in the different websites where they give advice about how to improve your body, how to improve your image, how to be able to be more successful getting a job and having a woman in your life. And very often these spaces are really taking advantage of these insecurities and this need for validation, for having happiness and security in their lives. And very often they really circulate messages that they are very dismissive of women's and girls' position in society. They tend to be very often very misogynistic, and they portray a very bad picture of women's rights activists, for example, and very often blaming this advocacy and the struggles that young men and boys may encounter in their own lives that everything is because of everyone trying to be put in the focus on women's and girls' equality and often neglecting the needs of men and boys.
So on that, basically misogynistic online content harms men and women alike. Can you explain a little bit further how this happens?
First of all, maybe I can start with a little bit the more obvious one, that the impact, the very serious impact that this kind of messaging, that it's so well spread right now because of the technology platform.
That was UN Women's Calliope Mingireo, who leads the efforts to end violence against women and girls, speaking to Anna Kamo of UN News. New research suggests that aging blood vessels, the cells sometimes called zombie cells, may be behind many of the long-lasting symptoms seen in COVID, long COVID, and chronic fatigue, including extreme tiredness, brain fog, and dizziness. These cells appear to affect both blood flow and the immune system. To help us understand more, we're speaking with Dr. Massimo Nunes, postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Psychological Sciences at Stellenbosch University and one of the scientists involved in this study. Good evening, Doctor. So lovely to have you on Channel Africa.
Good evening, Pumuzo. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm Tabiso. Pumuzo is the producer.
Okay, sorry.
I know. I understand it's him that you've been conversing with leading up to the interview.
Yes.
Let me start by asking you this, Dr. Nunes. Your research focuses on the so-called zombie cells. What are these cells and why are they so important? I've been asking myself this question since I've come across this.
Yes, so particularly we focus on blood. We focus on blood cells. We focus on coagulation, but more importantly, we focus on the cells that line the inside of blood vessels. So we call those cells endothelial cells, and we call that whole layer, the inner layer of blood vessels, the endothelium. And the endothelium is an extremely important tissue, as you alluded to, and that's because the endothelium regulates blood coagulation, it regulates inflammation, regulates metabolism, it regulates, importantly, the dilation and constriction of vessels. And importantly, in these diseases, we think that the favoring of constriction of these vessels actually leads to reduced blood perfusion, meaning that blood can't get to tissues and organs and bathe them that well. And there's substantial evidence to support this.
How do these Asian cells end up in the blood vessels, and what kind of damage can they cause?
So just to clarify, these aging cells is the inner lining of the blood vessels. We call that the endothelium. And typically they're healthy, they're not aging in normal individuals. But after contracting a viral infection, particularly SARS-CoV-2, we know that these endothelial cells, the inner lining of the blood vessels, can turn into this zombie-like state. And we call the zombie-like state senescence.
I see. So now, many people with what's referred to as long COVID say they feel exhausted or crash, especially after light activity. Some of them, tell you that they used to run 10 kilometers, but the person only does 1.5. What's that actually, and why?
So the whole point of this article is we do not really know what the mechanisms are that give rise to ME/CFS, that give rise to long COVID, the two most common post-viral diseases. And particularly talking about that symptom, which is the adverse effects that result from doing exercise or any kind of exertion, that is probably one of the most difficult symptoms to explain. And we think that perhaps in our article, we've done quite a good job of getting there. We just need some evidence to back it up for that particular symptom.
Your research links what's referred to also as brain fog and dizziness. You know, when you talk about brain fog, I'm just starting to visualize my brain in fog, or maybe, some sort of brain block.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So that's essentially what it is. We do a lot of cognitive tests to determine how well your cognition is, whether it be mathematical sums, whether it be cognition tests, formal cognition tests. We do that in these individuals, and we notice they score significantly lower than healthy populations. And this brain fog that we're referring to, it can range from various manifestations, whether it be inability to get speech out properly, or whether it be inability to perform your task, your job, whether it be accounting, numbers, or even something simple. It really plagues these individuals.
These cells are said to be affecting our immune system. Can't one just go over the counter and get something in order to protect my immune system from these cells?
I wish. So the issue with this, typically when we think of the immune system, what we actually want to avoid is inflammation, lots of inflammation, pro-inflammatory responses, which can be damaging to tissues. But in post-viral conditions, it's not necessarily pro-inflammation what we see. It's more so the dysregulation of the immune cells. So they don't function the way they should. They're not as toxic to pathogens, to bacteria, as they normally are. So finding the treatment that can target this anomaly is still an ongoing process. So unfortunately, we cannot go to the pharmacy, yes, and get medication for this.
These cells are something we can already detect in patients, or is that still being developed?
Yes, so that's actually one of the more pertinent questions related to this article. So we can detect it in patients, although the detection of a specific cell type and to quantify the senescence of a particular cell type is very difficult to do. And our hypothesis proposes that a particular cell type, the endothelial cells, are the ones that turn senescent. So we certainly still need to await better tests, better assays that can identify these cells in living patients. Nonetheless, we can still do that in animal models and obviously deceased patients, tissue from deceased patients.
Dr. Nunes, I'd like to really thank you for your time this evening. I've run out of time. We have hit 10 o'clock sharp Central African time. Nonetheless, I really appreciate you being available to talk to us about this all-important research.
Of course, and thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is all ours. It's Africa World Hour. My name is Thabiso Lohoko. Thanks for listening to us. Really, really, really appreciate broadcasting for you every day, all the time. Tune in to Channel Africa. Channel Africa continues. It doesn't stop. Bye-bye.